Well, good afternoon to all of our friends in Australia. Good morning to our friends in Singapore. Thank you for being on tonight's Zoom, or this morning and this afternoon Zoom where you are. We have a very special guest with us this evening, or this afternoon, this morning. I'm going to mess up like that from time to time. Sorry about that. But Dr. David Ajibade, and I've known Dr. Ajibade for well more than 10 years, maybe even 15 years by now. And I've always been fascinated with the work that he's been doing to help children that are dealing with a very, very serious, very specific condition. Now, Dr. Ajibade has been working with Mana Relief. Mana Relief is helping to supply our ACE Mannin technology that is exclusive to the Hope Movement to the Brain and Body Foundation so that Dr. Ajibade can use it in some of his intervention with these children that are suffering so greatly. So, Dr. Ajibade, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and coming on, saying hi to everybody.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Steve. How's
Good
it
to
going?
see you. Great to see you, Doctor. So, I have a couple quick questions for you.
Yep.
What is it about the aloe vera AE, our ACE Mannin extract, that you think is so valuable to these children when there are other ACE Mannin products out there in the world?
Yeah. And we, like you mentioned, we work with the Brain and Body Foundation, and we have the privilege of using different kinds of approaches, different kinds of supplements, different kinds of immune boosters, and all that. What we saw with the ACE Mannin, one was the quicker recovery. The recovery time was much faster. There was never any complaint, side effects, or what you would call it now, intolerance or reaction to the supplement. It was natural. I mean, it seems it worked with practically everyone that we used it on. And I think, again, because ACE Mannin is a key component of mother's breast milk. I mean, it doesn't get more natural to the body than that. So, and again, the potency was really superior.
And so our ACE Mannin is completely water soluble, where other ACE Mannins in the marketplace are not. Do you feel that that plays a role in the absorbency and utilization?
That certainly does, because like I said, we tried with all ages from 6 months of age, which is our cutoff point, to 18. I mean, that's what our foundation focuses on, and it worked rapidly. They could mix it with their food, with their drinks, whatever whatever way the mothers wanted to give it to them, and it always worked so well. So again, there were no reactions whatsoever to it.
And explain, if you will, you have something very unique that no other foundation that I've ever heard of has. You have what's called a memorandum of understanding with the government. And what does that exactly allow you to do when it comes to nutrition versus pharmaceuticals and things like that?
Yeah, I got to tell you, that was favor from from way up above, I guess. So the memorandum of understanding is basically like an agreement, a contractual agreement with the government that allows us to do quite a few things. All that stemmed from the results we're getting at the foundation with the children. I mean, the results we're getting, they were remarkable. People, they hadn't seen it anywhere else. And when we took some of our patients to the Ministry of Health and we gave a seminar there, and some of the parents stood up and talked about the results they were seeing in their children, what the director, the head who called that meeting, what she told me afterwards was that these are miracles. There's no other way to explain them. These are just miracles. It still took me about 2 more years to actually get that agreement, but blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of that later, we finally got it. Amongst other things, it helps us. We've been pretty much mandated by the federal government to address the burden of sickle cell disease in Nigeria, and we are ground central. We are the epicenter of sickle cell disease in the world. We have the most number of patients by far. We'll get to that later, I guess. It helps us address all kinds of non-communicable diseases, from cardiovascular disease to strokes, to dementia, neurological conditions, mental health conditions. I mean, the whole gamut. And the cool thing is, yes, we can use nutraceuticals to address these conditions. Not only can we use them to address these conditions, we can also teach about them. We asked for a lot, and I was surprised they gave us everything. And I guess, again, because of the remarkable results we were getting, they were so impressed that they pretty much gave us a blank check. Not only that, I asked that we need to train medical students, the upcoming doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals, on the importance of nutraceuticals and nutrients in the treatment of patients. And we asked for that, and again, they gave it to us. I'm also on TV. We have a TV show that airs 5 times a week, and I try to bring these philosophies and these approaches to the general populace. And again, that's in conjunction and with the approval of the Federal Ministry of Health of Nigeria. So lots of directions to go with all that. And
so why is it that you focus on children instead of older people with sickle cell that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s? I know the answer, it's a sad one, but if you would.
Yeah, for one, we don't find too many of them in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Most of them are dead, unfortunately, before the age of 30. And in fact, the WHO says that 50 to 70% will die before the age of 5. And those who survive, most of them are gone by the age of 30. Besides that, well, it's a foundation. Our goal was that, first of all, another reason is that it's a lot easier to treat kids than it is to treat adults. They tend to respond a lot better, and they tend to, because they have more reserves, obviously, they have more reserves, their bodies are still working like they should, so they can respond a lot better. But back to the key thing, which is the hard issue here, these are kids, they're just starting off in life. And it is tragic, it is sad, really, that kids who have done nothing wrong, they didn't smoke excessively, they didn't drink excessively, they didn't shoot drugs. It is, to me, it's a gross tragedy, really, an injustice for kids to start off in life with these heavy burdens upon them and having to deal with all that. So obviously our hearts went out to them, and we wanted to see what we could do about it. And we found out, who would have thought that a genetic disease, a disease that has baffled healthcare professionals for decades, can be addressed with something as simple as a supplement. I didn't say treat or cure, but bottom line, who cares if they're treated or who cares if they're cured? The bottom line is are they able to live a normal life with or without the disease? And that's what we're aiming for, helping these kids live without the pain and the suffering that these diseases cause them. So,
absolutely. And so you were looking at not just our ACE Mannan, it's the Alivea AE that led you to look at some of our other supplements that we have available to Alivea, to our distributors, to our customers. And you got some balance in, and instead of taking it yourself, you shared that with somebody. So would you mind sharing that story with with all of us?
Yeah. Gosh. One of the things that when I first got back to Nigeria many years ago was that people were always asking, well, do you have something that can help in terms of libido and sex and for the prostate health? We Africans, we consider those things really, really important, right? So, and they were like, you need to find something that works. And really, I kind of searched around a little bit, but my focus was on brain disorders. So I didn't really find, but this thing kept on coming up. Enlarged people with enlarged prostate, men in their 40s and 50s and beyond, and having to wake up at night several times to go to the bathroom. And one of my friends, who is a military officer, a high-ranking military officer, he asked about it. And luckily at that time, I had spoken to you, Steve, a couple of times about it, and you told me how this works. So I had, asked for some free samples, and I got them. And so I kind of gave them over to my friend, and he, like many other people, he was always waking up at night to go to the bathroom because of his enlarged prostate. And soon afterwards, it subsided, and he called. It was like, what is inside? What is in these supplements? And I tried to explain to him. Well, he ran out, and I tried to find something else to give to him. And I mean, I had tried other supplements before, and so I said, okay, well, try this one. And after a week, he came back and says, no, this is not working. This is not working like the balance. Let's have the balance. And of course, and we're having trouble getting stuff from the US. So at that time it was really tough. And he just kept on bugging me about it. So I'm glad when we finally got it for him, I was like, here, take, do not disturb me about it again for a while. But he's very happy with it. Very, very happy with it.
And you like that formula, don't you?
Oh, I absolutely love it. I've started taking it myself. Sleep, energy, just the general feeling of wellness is something that can only be gotten. I mean, mostly be gotten when your hormones are in balance, and that applies for both men and women. People just don't realize how important the hormonal balance is, and unfortunately, we don't have too many talks about that, and we don't have too many supplements about that. Especially in third world countries like Nigeria. So having a supplement that actually does that and helps to keep things in check, especially for women, we've talked about men already, but for women who are going through those menopausal periods, I mean, that can be very distressing for many women. I've seen my own fair share of people who have those issues. I mean, simply giving them the raw materials and the right balance of there's that word, balance, of the supplements can go a long way. Yeah, so I'm very grateful for that, Steve. That's a really good one you guys got.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up your slides and let you share your presentation with everyone. And you just tell me when to change slides and I will do it.
Okay, great. So, next slide. So, some people may be wondering what sickle cell disease is, so I really want to make it just quickly explain that. Sickle cell disease is a genetic disorder that affects primarily the red blood cells. I mean, it affects other cells as well, but primarily the red blood cells. And what happens? What happens is that the red blood cell, which is supposed to be nice and red and circular, and it primarily takes oxygen from the heart to all the cells and tissues in the bodies. I mean, it has to be soft, it has to be round, it has to be flexible enough to go through the blood vessels, especially this tighter and smaller blood vessels. Now, there's a problem. When it comes to sickle cell disease, it is no longer round and smooth and flexible and soft. It actually, under certain conditions, it shrivels up, it dehydrates, and becomes hard and sickle shaped, hence the name sickle cell disease, and it becomes really sharp. And once it's no longer as flexible and pliable. So when it gets into smaller blood vessels, like the blood vessels of the hands and the feet, it tends to get stuck. And we all know what happens when blood flow is abruptly cut off. It can cause pain, it can cause damage to the tissues and the organs, and eventually can cause death. And that's what happens with sickle cell disease. It can be an extremely excruciatingly painful disease, especially with the younger kids. And again, it's just because of that simple thing, that the blood vessels or the blood cells are not as round and pliable as they should be. And that causes all kinds of problems, depending on where the blockage is. In the brain, it can cause a stroke. In the eyes, it can cause blindness. In the liver, the bones, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So yeah, Steve has already mentioned it. So we've been given approval by the federal government, and we've also been given approval by the state governments to study how nutrients can improve the quality of life of children with sickle cell disease. Next slide, please. So our goal is, again, is not to treat the condition. We're going to leave that to the experts. Our goal is that wherever we find kids with sickle cell disease, they should be enjoying a quality of life. In other words, a boy should be able to play soccer or football for the full 90 minutes as his peers can. The ladies should be able to play and do all the things that ladies do. They shouldn't be falling down on the ground in pain. They shouldn't be fainting. They shouldn't be suddenly panting for breath just going up a flight of stairs. I mean, that's a normal kid's life doesn't have those things, and we want to see that in kids with sickle cell disease as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a little busy slide. I'm just going to touch on a few things. Second to the last from the bottom, 10%, greater than 10% of all kids born with sickle cell disease will suffer a stroke in their lifetime. And that's what brought these kids to us. We were focused on brain disorders at the Brain and Body Foundation. And then we started having kids coming to us in wheelchairs, having had multiple strokes before the age of 10. I mean, that's tragic. That's terrible. And unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons why we went into it. But the more we went into it, the more we saw other problems. Like, for instance, almost 200,000 kids are born every year with sickle cell disease. Now, in the US, the total number of kids of kids and adults with sickle cell disease is about 100,000. And a lot more research is going on with that much lower number. Australia is about 20,000, Singapore is about 5,000. Now, those may not seem like very high numbers, but I tell you what, the families and the friends and the relatives of those who have sickle cell disease know that it is an all-encompassing disease. It affects every aspect of your life, whether you're a parent, a child, or a relative of the child with sickle cell disease. It's a crippling, agonizingly painful disease. Over 80% each of children born each year with sickle cell disease are born in Africa. Nigeria has the highest number by far. So I just feel that the answers and solutions should come from Nigeria, since Nigeria is the one with the most. And so it was so fortunate that we were able to tie Ace Mannon to help to not treat sickle cell disease, but to strengthen the immune system. And I think that's just a wonderful way. And I'll tell you, and I'll explain to you why we started focusing on the immune system for children with sickle cell disease. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going, again, this is another busy slide, but basically the standard approach, which is the conventional medical approach to sickle cell disease. Basically, we've just raised the white flag, and we've just given up, and we've said, as doctors, well, you can't really treat sickle cell disease unless with a bone marrow transplant, and that's not very available. So basically, what we want to do is we want to avoid having more kids being born with sickle cell disease. So if you have this trait, don't get married to someone who has the trait. If you have the disease, well, we'll try and manage you with the folic acid, which helps to rebuild red blood cells. We'll try to prevent you from having malaria. We'll try to prevent infections. And if you have a crisis, we'll just admit you and we'll treat you as needed. That's pretty much all there is to it. Unfortunately, this does not work well enough. Too many kids who are doing everything that conventional medicine offers are still dying and suffering tremendously from the disease. So it's not enough. And I just call that a management approach. You're just managing around the disease. You're not dealing with you're not dealing with the body itself. And I say, well, let's not manage around the weakness. Let's build strength. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see what I'm talking about. So what I believe is needed is, next slide, please, is an approach which is holistic, providing solutions that are effective. They have to work rapidly. Parents, if it doesn't work in 1 week, 2 weeks, I always change, because if it's not going to work in 2 weeks, well, it's probably the wrong approach. It has to be safe, because many of these parents come long distances. They live in remote areas. They don't have an emergency room next to where they live. So you don't want to compound their problems. So it has to be safe. It should be administered by both experts and non-experts, because there are some drugs that are available that sort of help, but you've got to monitor the blood levels. You've got to ensure that they don't overdose or don't give too much, because the drugs can actually kill the patient. Well, that's not going to work too well in Nigeria, because most people don't have access to expert care, unfortunately. Next slide. So I have this slide here, basically because I was trying to prove to healthcare professionals, and we give this presentation to healthcare professionals as well. We say, well, even if you don't agree with using ACE management specifically, the internet is rife with lots and lots of documentation showing that children with sickle cell disease are deficient in a slew of different nutrients. And even if you start there, let's say you don't like me, you don't want to use ACE mannan. There are other nutrients that these kids are lacking. So start there, and it's still a battle just to get them to look at it that way. All right, next slide. We can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, let's go back one. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's go on. Let's go on to the next one, Steve. Okay. I've mentioned the word crisis, and I hope everybody understands what crisis means. So basically, when those blood vessels get blocked by the sickle-shaped cells, or sometimes the red blood cells could just spontaneously erupt, just break up. And when that happens, there's a sudden drop in blood volume and what is known as PCV or hematocrit, and the child is just faints. I mean, just loses a lot of blood, and you got to take them and have a blood transfusion. So those are the two main crises that happen, and they are triggered by different things, maybe changes in temperature, an infection, even emotional stress. I know some of my older patients, when they would do well, but when it came to time for exams, academic exams, they would suddenly have a crisis because all of a sudden they're stressed, they're reading, they're not eating like they should, and they're just staying up late at night, and they would have a crisis. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. All right. Next slide, please. Again, strenuous exercise. So many times parents would just say, listen, these kids, they're weak, they're going to get stressed, they're going to have a crisis. Let's keep them from playing outdoors. So when their peers are out playing soccer or whatever, the kids that have to stay indoors, they have to either play video games or watch TV, or if they have those available. And to me, that's just not right. I mean, kids should be kids. They should be out there getting dirty, getting into fights if they need to. I mean, they should be kids. They shouldn't have their formative years, their growing up years stolen from them because of something like sickle cell disease. And thank God we have a solution to it. So our approach is called the building strength approach. And so what I started doing when I saw these kids with strokes, and when I saw sickle cell disease was such a big problem, was that I started looking, I did a lot of research into what were the areas of weakness in sickle cell disease and how we could address those areas of weakness. And we called them the 4 horsemen when we identify them. And once you look at them, you'll see that they are pretty familiar. So weaknesses in children in individuals with sickle cell disease, the number one thing was, of course, that they all had weakened immune systems. They all had weakened immune systems. The next was they were not able, didn't have enough antioxidant capability. And of course, you know that. They had poor inflammatory control. They had a lot of inflammation, especially in the lining of their blood vessels. And I'm sure you've heard that before, maybe from some talks given by Steve or Sam and other members of the Alovia team. And of course, their nitric oxide levels. And that's a very important thing here. And I'll get to that in a minute. But when we started working with these, and then later on, we started looking into what Alovia had, and we realized that your integrative health pack kits sort of covered a lot of the things that are here. Now, obviously, the ACE mannan deals with immunity. Number 3, the Limitless deals with inflammation. And again, Limitless, because Limitless has beets in it. Beets are really important for nitric oxide. And I'm going to explain to you why that's important, especially for Black people. And those of you who are Black and are out there, you've got to listen. You have to realize that we Black people have weaknesses, certain weaknesses that make us more susceptible to certain conditions. Just as white people, yes, have weaknesses that make them more susceptible to certain conditions. Our weaknesses have to do with the fact that we don't produce enough or as much nitric oxide, especially as we grow older and older. And what does nitric oxide do? Nitric oxide helps to open up the blood vessels. It helps to open up, relax the blood vessels. It helps to dilate the blood vessels so that blood can flow through. Well, if you don't produce enough nitric oxide, the blood vessels remain tight and narrow, and that can lead to hypertension, which can lead to kidney damage and other conditions. Well, in sickle cell disease, the obvious thing is their nitric oxide levels are very low. Therefore, because they're constantly trying to produce nitric oxide, and the sickle cell that is damaging the blood vessels, making them scarred, making them tight, and making them rigid. So it doesn't allow blood to flow. So we realized we had to address all these things. But the first thing, we decided we're going to start with the first thing, which was addressing the immune system. And lo and behold, what was shocking to me, I was just trying to, okay, let's start with immune system, let's start with immune control, and then we'll just go down the line. But I have to say this, when we started with just immune, using ACE Mannin to address strengthening the immune systems, 80 to 85% of the time, the kids would come back after 2 weeks and say, hey, I feel perfectly well. They no longer had crisis. They were no longer tired. They no longer had pains. It was like they were okay. And I mean, I was shocked because I was like, okay, we still have a lot more work to do. But in many of the cases, except in the more complicated cases where they had maybe kidney damage or they had damage to their bones, that's when we had to add other things. But just by improving their immunity, I mean, I'm still shocked up to now, after 3 years of doing this, 4 years of doing this, I'm still shocked that simply by improving immunity, these kids with sickle cell disease could improve so well. Next slide, please. We can go to the next, yeah. So, Steve, you want us to discuss these, or these? We decided to put out some examples for you guys out there, and
Well,
some of the cases we've been seeing.
I'll jump in here real quick, doctor, and say, our products don't treat, cure, or mitigate any disease. They are designed to support human physiology. And what Dr. Ajbade is going to go through are the results that his patients had when they supported their bodies with proper nutrients. So I'll let you take it back over, doctor.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with the first example. One of the things that we saw that was consistent was that these kids were small, extremely small for their age. And I mean, you can understand that if you're not getting enough blood, if you're not getting enough oxygen to your cells, well, your cells are just not going to do as well. Typically, you should have about 40, when we talk about PCV, the level of red blood cells in the body, the usual figure is about 40%, maybe late 30s to 40s. Most of our patients were in the low 20s, not mid 20s, but low 20s. So right off the bat, you can see that they are at a disadvantage. They are not going to be thriving well. I mean, forget the crisis, forget the pain. The cells were just not getting enough oxygen and were not getting enough nutrients. So as a rule, most of them were small for age. So this is one of the kids they would bus them in from the villages. These kids had no idea the parents had no idea what sickle cell disease. All they knew was that this kid was always having crisis, it was always in pain. And so they would bring them over and then they would test them, and then we would provide them with the nutrients. So symptoms prior to the first visit, there was fever, he was always tired, he couldn't walk, he had a swollen stomach and elbow, and he had waist pain and back pain. He was always having crisis. So within a few weeks, he had better appetites. The parents said he's now walking with less pain. And we saw that over and over again. Next slide. This kid too was really small for his age. Again, the same thing. He had swollen hands. He had a lot of fever. I think in this guy's case, yeah, in his case, he had when I first saw it, I just thought it was maybe like a small sore or something. It was like a white spot. To me, what I saw was like a white thing on his hand. Later on, we found out that it was his bone sticking out. His bone was sticking out of his out of his the palm of his hand, and he was living with that. Basically, they had so many the sickling of the cells had caused so much damage to the blood vessels in the bone that the bone just gave up and had an infection and eventually, in a short time, we tried to get him to the hospital, but they couldn't make it to the hospital. So in a short time, that bone basically fell out of his hand. And that's how these people live. They just deal with it, try whatever way they can, and just keep going until either the thing resolves by itself or the patient dies, unfortunately. And so we were able to save a lot of these kids, help a lot of these kids. Next slide. Again, a small chick kid. She had a really swollen elbow, and we have videos of all these kids. I mean, they gave us permission to videotape them and keep them videotaped. who uses videotapes these days? Anyway, you get the idea. So we have a lot of videos on our website where we show the progression. And again, it was always the same pattern: pain, swelling, tiredness, infections. And again, what we did was simply strengthen the immune systems. Next slide. So these were the tragic ones. These kids came to us with strokes. I mean, in his case, he had 3 or 4 strokes. And he had hip damage to his hips. I mean, his mother had to carry him everywhere. I mean, it's a really, really sad case. They would have had to do some orthopedic surgery on him, and also a lot of things he needed to get done. So it was people like him that made us feel, well, listen, let's try and get to these kids before they have complications. Let's help them. Let's strengthen them before they have complications. Next slide. Next slide, please. And this was another one too. Let's go back one. The kid on the wheelchair, his was even worse. He couldn't even move his head. All he could do was move his eyes. Terrible. And so we were able to help them to some degree. I mean, a lot of it depended on them coming to us every at least twice a week or twice a month, and that was hard for a lot of people. But whenever they came, we would give them everything we possibly could to ensure that they improved. Yes, sir.
Doctor, can you go through the improvement as it goes through with this particular case, each step of the way what you saw?
Okay. So after the first week, the parents mentioned that he was sleeping throughout the night. He was moving his limbs more. I mean, this kid, like I said, he came in with absolutely nothing, no control of nothing. He couldn't even move his head. But they said within 7 days, he was moving his limbs more. He was calmer. His eyes were getting clearer. That's another thing. Most of these kids have jaundiced eyes, which means their eyes are really, really yellow because of the breakdown of the red blood cells. After 21 days, parents said he's more alert, aware of his environment, eats better, and looks brighter. There was improvement, according to the parents, after 35 days. So that's just over a month. There was improvement in the way he moves his body after 49 days. Again, we were just basically what the parents write down in the questionnaire that we give them every time they come. We would just transcribe that and put them in the slides. So after 72 days, he's moving his body very well and more freely than before. After 93 days, he's moving around even more these days. So the parents saw progressive improvement in his health. Okay, so here's another one, Grateful Okpara. I remember when he came to us with his mother after the first month of using the supplements. I looked at him and I said, well, Grateful, so how are you doing? And he just looked at me and just started laughing. He just started laughing. And I was wondering, what was I wearing a clown nose or something? Or but he was just like, this was a kid who had lived with pain day in, day out. His mother said, so they would have to get up from the taxi and they would have to walk a long distance to our clinic from where the drop-off point was. His mother said many times he would not be able to make that walk, so she would have to carry him. But this time, he walked all the way without any stress whatsoever. So it was like, in his mind, he's like, what are you? It's like, I'm feeling like a normal human being now. And the parents too were very, very happy too. So now one more, let's go back a little bit, Steve, see that. So on day 59 on immune support, I guess maybe they had forgotten to type in the results there, but basically less pain. Can see this slide. Okay, a few days after. Okay, yeah. So in his case, too, supplements, the challenge again was they had to keep coming. Sometimes they would miss an appointment, or maybe they didn't have transportation fare. Their husband didn't give them money, didn't give the wife money to make their trip. All kinds of things go wrong. So sometimes when they miss treatment, or when they miss, I have to stay away from the word treatment, but when they miss using the supplements, sometimes it would go back because it's a genetic condition. It's part of his genes. So yes, there's significant improvements, but you got to keep on supporting the immune system for you to continue to enjoy it. But that's, I mean, it's you're going to have to keep on using it, but it's so much better than not having this kind of support. So that's what I believe. So I don't know if Steve mentioned this earlier, but so we're partnering with Mana Relief and to do a 6-month project now using Ace Manon in 3 different hospitals. We have a small cohort of patients we want to look at, about 150 patients in government hospitals, specifically government hospitals, so that the government doctors can generate this data in the hospitals themselves. I want to use this data to go back to the government and say, listen, strengthening the immune system works. You've got to change the policy by which kids with sickle cell disease are treated. You've got to include an approach, in addition to folic acid, and the anti-malarials and the antibiotics. It would be criminal. And we want to make sure the data is so convincing and so compelling that it would be criminal, in my opinion, not to make a policy that includes strengthening the immune system that healthcare professionals all over Nigeria should follow. And again, we're beginning with Nigeria, but this applies all over the world, whether it's in Australia or Singapore, South Africa, the USA. Sickle cell disease is sickle cell disease, and strengthening the immune system is strengthening the immune system. So we're hoping that this will be a start of some really good things to come.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation, Dr. Ajibade. Very informative for those of you out there that have never heard of sickle cell or have heard of it but didn't even know what it was. It's actually a very, very challenging condition. And I'm also pleased to announce that Dr. Ajibade, due to conversations with me, has asked me to outline some parameters for a study for the Brain and Body Foundation to do on balance. So we're going to be looking at balance for people with prostate issues, challenges, if you will, and blood sugar challenges. So I'm very much looking forward to having you back again in the future and talking about those results as well. And then we will also quite possibly be doing a separate study on Limitless. So very, very excited to have the Brain and Body Foundation as a partner with Alovea, who is taking our products very, very seriously. You take note of the science and you feel that the science is very sound. And we appreciate having medical professionals, doctor with the stature such as yourself, supporting our products and being interested in making an impact in the lives of children around the world, because that's really what we're all about here at Alovea. We are a social business 3.0 for a reason. We don't want to just impact the lives of the people that market our products. We don't want to just impact the lives of the people that consume our products, but we also want to help children in need all around the world. So thank you again, Dr. Ajibade. We appreciate you being on, and I appreciate all of you being on this week. So make sure you join us again next week. We're not going to do Q&A tonight. I'm sorry, we've run a little bit over, but we will do it again next week. Look forward to seeing you all. God bless you. Thanks again for being here.